It's the most wonderful time of the year.
Each year, in the weeks preceding Christmas Eve, a number of meetings are held by senior ALF officials at the North Pole headquarters of North Pole Think Tank. NPTT had been established in the mid-20th century to investigate all things Christmas, with the goal of adapting the efforts of North Pole to more effectively address the evolving world. Their motto or tagline, adopted from an internal contest in 1984, is creatively crunching Christmas concepts. The meetings are all chaired by Santa's Chief of Staff, Hugo Elfie, who is charged with funneling the efforts of the NPTT into practical application. Although Hugo has respect for NPTT and the results of their efforts in past years, he clearly harbors an underlying resentment of the process and contempt for some of the intellectuals. Hugo has organized several meetings, but presented here are two that have particular relevance this year: threat assessment and logistics. The first is held earliest, with the results providing input to subsequent meetings.
Welcome to our annual threat assessment meeting. Our goal is to identify and document any significant threats of this year's toy trip. I ask that each of you to focus on the issues which I provided in my outline. Herman, let's start with the threats from organized terrorist groups.
Thank you, sir. As in the past, we have been in contact with some of the world's foremost information gathering agencies, including Interpol, MI6, and the CIA. Once again, they were unanimous in identifying the Middle East, in particular the West Bank, Gaza, Syria, and Western Iraq, as areas of particular concern. They recommend avoiding such areas altogether. Major established organizations indicated on all lists as possible threats to Santa are Hezbollah and, of course, Al-Qaeda. In the current hotspots, two organizations are also identified: Khorasan and ISIS.
Why are these groups of particular concern?
A quick Google will reveal hundreds of organizations that may have issues with Santa and what he represents, but these groups have infrastructure that would allow them to acquire or assemble weapons and delivery systems that could threaten Santa's Christmas Eve mission.
Have you identified any specific threats?
We have found a couple of websites, smashsanta.com and crushchristmas.org, that are dedicated in opposition to everything that Santa represents. They include various proposals ranging from disruption of Christmas activities to bombing of the North Pole. We have found nothing from a major terrorist organization voicing a specific threat against Santa. We are sure that their quandary is balancing the value of destroying an icon of Christianity against the reaction of the entire world, including many of their own followers.
Are you saying that we have little to fear from these major terrorist organizations?
As organizations, there seems to be little threat. However, the control that they exert over their membership, particularly in war zones, suggests that we should consider the recommendation of the major intelligence organizations to avoid these areas.
What about the followers of the Hate Santa websites?
Unfortunately, we have been able to identify a plethora of small groups and individuals who frequent these sites, and the access to the components of a bomb and the directions of assembly are too easy. There are also handheld rocket launchers that can deliver from a significant distance, which are also readily available to anyone with necessary funds.
Well, on that optimistic note, let's focus on threats from individuals. Harry, what are your findings?
Thank you, sir. We have spent the past year refining our data mining software that scours various databases of major social media platforms. We have long been able to isolate threat language and identify the sources, but this year, based on analytical work on the results of previous investigations, we can now categorize likely threat levels based on language and context.
Can you rephrase that in English?
If someone makes an entry on Twitter or Facebook that contains threatening language relative to Christmas or Santa, our software analyzes it relative to language and context used in entries that were previously investigated. In this way, we can focus on only those threats that have been determined as statistically serious.
Thanks for clearing that up. So, what are your specific findings?
We have identified 319 incidents that rise to the level of criminal threat, and we have passed those on to the appropriate authorities. Based on location of the threat, we have developed a color-coded map that identifies areas of concern for those incidents that do not meet the criteria of a criminal threat. We were discouraged to find that since last Christmas Eve, there have been 12,695 such expressions of threat against Santa.
What about letters to Santa?
We now routinely scan the text of all letters received for Santa at our North Pole facility. This is done in conjunction with the scan for explosives, poisons, and pathogens. We use the same analytical software that we use to scour the social media databases. At your suggestion, we no longer pass on the letters that rise to the criteria of criminal threat, but these are directed to the authorities at the origin. More than 1,000 of such letters have been received in the past year. More than 50,000 letters have been received that contain language that, although threatening, does not constitute a criminal act. Santa insists on seeing these letters to better understand the mood of his constituency. It is notable that the incidence of such letters has dramatically increased since the beginning of the worldwide recession in 2008.
Thanks for the update, Harriet. Let's conclude with a discussion of naturally occurring threats. Take it away, Herman.
The weather is always a factor, and global warming seems to be making it less predictable. This year's analysis is further complicated by the fact that we're being visited upon by El Nino. Volcanoes in Iceland may also be involved. Another significant threat that may be categorized as natural would be the possibility of pandemic that is Ebola, now centered in West Africa. Regarding the weather, we have access to the best available short and long-term forecasting available, but we cannot be more specific until we are within 2 weeks of the event. Authorities involved in the Ebola pandemic strongly recommend that the affected area be avoided this year. The possibility of infection and transmission must be balanced against the benefits of this year's visit.
Thanks for your verbal submissions today. Please document your findings as soon as possible so I may pass them along to the logistics people for their consideration.
It's the most wonderful time